That winter, every hearth in the valley went cold, every hearth but one. A low turf hut beside a smoldering mound, smoke still rising. They had painted a red arrow on his door like a joke, a hovel fit for a hog. But that was back in autumn, when the mockery was fresh, and the charcoal burner named Matthew worked alone.
That's no home. It's a mud cave. Even the hogs wouldn't go in there. A red arrow for the Hovel man. Let him know where he belongs.
Inside, Matthew sat in a warmth the town didn't believe existed. Cinder asleep at his feet, his hands, black with charcoal dust, held a fuel that would outlast every log in the valley. He tended the smoking mound, the earth cover insulating the slow burn within, and as the first snow fell, he split kindling with a patience the town had long abandoned. The morning after the first snow, Eli led a handful of men toward the charcoal burner's hut, a bucket of red paint swinging at his side.
Hold him still. If he fights, this hovel's getting its proper sign.
They held no man. Matthew simply stood in the doorway and watched them paint the red arrow on his own door.
There. Now, everyone'll know what kind of shack this is.
Matthew said nothing. He turned back inside, to the warmth they didn't believe in. When Matthew entered the store later that week, Harlow shook his head before the door even closed.
We don't serve colliers here. Trades for honest men who burn wood.
Matthew walked out without a word. The bell above the door jangled in the silence, back at his mound. He fed the smoldering earth as if the town's contempt were just another layer of ash. The snow thickened, and the valley's woodpiles began their long, invisible shrinking. A hard freeze followed the first snow, the kind that cracked stone and stole breath from the lungs.
Blasted cold. At least we burn honest wood, not that smoldering dirt.
Inside the turf hut, Matthew fed just 3 lumps of charcoal to his brazier. The room stayed warm enough to sleep without a coat. One afternoon, he held a piece of charcoal out to a passing boy. The child stared at the black lump, then backed away.
Don't touch that filth, boy. That's not fuel. It's poison.
Matthew returned inside. Through the small window, he watched the snow pile against the turf walls, which held the heat like a blanket. The cold deepened. Town hearths consumed split wood faster than men could haul it. A wheelbarrow of logs that once lasted 2 days now burned through before morning. At night, the valley froze hard. Chimney smoke thinned across the rooftops as families hoarded their fuel.
Only a coward hides in a mud cave. A real man faces the winter with a real fire.
In Harlow's store, the backroom ledger told a story the town still refused to read aloud.
The wood won't last. Not at this rate.
Across town, the widow Bryce pulled her shawl tighter as her child coughed beside a dying fire. Matthew lifted a frozen tarp behind his hut. Beneath it, the charcoal stockpile could have warmed the whole valley for weeks.
That mud hovel won't hold. First heavy snow, the roof caves, and we'll find him frozen solid.
Inside the hut, Matthew sat with Cinder, reading an old book by charcoal light. The turf walls held steady, the roof thick and dry. Outside, the mound smoked on, a slow heartbeat in the snow, indifferent to the town's mockery. Harlow ran his finger down the column of figures again. The woodpile would be gone long before spring. The widow's child coughed again, a raw sound in the silent house. She had no more coin for wood, and still, no one walked the path to the charcoal burner's door. A midwinter howler buried the valley under drifts that climbed to the windowsills. The town's woodpile, already low, vanished beneath a fresh white weight.
Real men burn wood. I'd sooner freeze than touch a lump of collier's filth.
Inside the turf hut, Matthew heard the wind scream, but the cold did not reach him. He placed a single fresh lump on the brazier, and the little room stayed warm. Across the valley, town hearths devoured wood like kindling, the pile shrinking by the hour. Harlow stood at his window, watching men haul logs through the blizzard, his face grim. By morning, the woodpile was a low mound, and the storm still howled.
That Hovel man's probably a block of ice by now.
But from the chimney of Matthew's hut, a thin gray smoke rose unbroken. After the storm, Harlow called the town to his store. The woodpile was a skeleton, and the mood was colder than the air outside.
2 logs per household per day is dough, no more. We'll stretch what we have.
Matthew entered behind them, a sack of charcoal on his shoulder. The room went still.
I can sell charcoal. It lasts longer than wood.
We don't need your filthy trade, Collier. That black dust will poison our homes.
Harlow only shook his head. Matthew turned and walked back into the cold.
That arrow marks the truth. A turf hut is a fire risk, a trap waiting to burn.
The red arrow, meant as a joke, now became a brand of fear. The rumor spread like frost. By night, men whispered that the collier's hut was a torch waiting to ignite. Inside, Cinder growled at every footstep in the snow, while Matthew sat in a quiet that the town no longer trusted. Then the second cold snap hit. Not a freeze, but a hammer of air so cold it split nails in barn wood. In the widow's home, the child's cough deepened into a barking rasp that no blanket could muffle.
If the wood runs out before spring, half this town won't make it.
But inside the turf hut, Matthew fed his brazier with a small black lump, and the room held its heat steady. The cold snap gnawed through the wood supply. By the third night, even Harlow's 2-log rule was not enough. Around the saloon's last coals, some men began to speak the word charcoal in whispers.
Any man who touches that Collier filth is no friend of mine.
That night, after the saloon emptied, Eli bundled himself in a heavy coat and started toward the forest path. He told no one where he was going, but the direction was unmistakable. Toward the charcoal burner's hut. Cinder raised his head and let out a low, rumbling growl as footsteps pressed the snow outside. Matthew pulled open the door. Eli stood frozen, one hand reaching for a sack of charcoal, his face a mask of cold and shame. Matthew did not shout. He simply stepped aside, and the warmth from inside spilled out over Eli's frozen cheek. Eli stumbled through the low doorway. The dry heat wrapped around him like a blanket he had never been offered.
This place, it's not a hovel. It's dry, warmer than any house in town.
There's tea on the coals. Thaw your hands before the frost takes them.
Beyond the brazier, sacks of charcoal lined the earthen wall, enough fuel to last until spring and beyond.
How do you keep it so warm? I've burned whole logs and still frozen.
Charcoal. It holds its heat steady. A single lump outlasts a cord of green wood.
Eli drank the tea and said nothing more. He slept on the floor near Cinder, and for the first night in weeks, he did not shiver. He crept out before dawn, head bowed. He had stolen nothing, but he carried a truth he could not unlearn. Eli walked back into town as the sun rose, his silence thicker than the frost on his beard.
You look like you've seen a ghost, Eli. Where were you last night?
That hut, it's warm. Warmer than any house in town. And he has charcoal enough to last forever.
The men fell silent. Harlow, stepping out of his store, caught the tail end and stopped still.
Charcoal. Could it really be the answer we've been too proud to see?
By midday, the rumor had shifted. Some whispered that the hovel might be salvation, not a trap.
I painted that arrow myself, mocked him for weeks, and he still gave me tea.
The cold snap held its bite. That evening, a meeting gathered in Harlow's store like a confession.
I don't know if we can trust the collier's fuel, but we may have no other choice.
But no vote was taken. They left the store without walking the path to the charcoal burner's door. At first light, The sky did not brighten, it thickened. A freezing rain began to fall, sheathing every branch and twig in clear ice. The trees in the forest soon bowed under the weight of glassy sheaths, brittle as spun sugar. An axe bounced off an ice-bound log near the woodpile, and the men knew no more timber could be cut.
Eli, you've been inside his hut. Go to the collier and bring back charcoal, whatever price he asks.
Eli pulled his hat low and stepped into the stinging rain, the path already a treacherous glaze. In the clearing, Matthew watched the ice build on his turf roof, then calmly added fresh earth to his mound.
Cinder, the storm will pass. We've seen worse.
Cinder whined, his head cocked at the strange crackle of raindrops freezing mid-fall. Through the gray-white curtain, a dark shape stumbled forward, Eli half frozen, one hand outstretched toward the red arrow. He had come not to steal, but to beg. Matthew pulled open the door and caught Eli as his knees buckled on the ice, the red arrow behind him blurry through the freezing rain. Inside the warmth, Eli slumped against the turf wall, ice melting from his beard, and forced out the words.
The town's out of wood. The ice has sealed the forest. We need charcoal. Matthew, please.
I'll sell charcoal. A fair price for each sack. But I have another condition. The town will call this place what it is. A collier's home, not a hovel fit for a hog.
I'll make them say it, I swear. Just please give us the charcoal. This hut, this hovel, I marked with my own brush, and now I am on my knees begging for its warmth.
Matthew did not smile. He simply rose and began stacking heavy sacks of charcoal by the door.
It will outlast the ice and the cold.
By the time the freezing rain slackened into a fine mist, 5 heavy sacks of charcoal were piled on the sled, and Cinder stood ready, his tail giving a single, reluctant wag. Eli took the rope. Together, he and Matthew hauled the sled through the freezing mist, Cinder padding behind, the only warmth in the world coming from the sacks they carried. The town saw them first as a dark shape on the white road. Then the memory of the red arrow pulsed in every mind.
You brought it, charcoal. I never thought I'd see the day. The price, whatever it is, the town will pay. But what's this other condition?
He wants us to call his place what it is. A collier's home, not a hovel.
Then let it be known. From this day, that hut is a collier's home, and its charcoal saved us.
Coin changed hands between the storekeeper and the collier, the first honest payment Matthew had received in the valley. In a dozen hearths, the first lumps of charcoal caught the flame, burning slow and hot, nothing like the quick flare of split wood. Outside, the ice storm continued its assault, but inside those small homes, frost no longer crept across the floorboards. The hovel had become a lifeline. But the ice still held the forest, and the town's need was far from over. For 3 days, the ice storm never broke. Matthew made the journey back to his hut 4 more times, each return bringing a sled heavy with charcoal sacks. Eli no longer just pulled the rope. He led the way, calling out the path to the other men who now volunteered to help.
This black stone burns hotter than any log I ever split. The collier was right.
Matthew's charcoal outlasts everything. I've never seen a fuel hold so steady. The town owes him more than coin.
But Matthew did not come to collect thanks. He arrived, delivered the sacks, took payment, and turned back toward his smoking mound without lingering. At night, the widow Bryce saw her hearth glow for the first time in months, and the child's cough began to ease.
I painted that arrow to shame him. Now it marks the only house that saved us.
The men who had once mocked now spoke the collier's name with a rough respect, though Matthew still kept his distance.
We'll need more, much more. The ice shows no sign of cracking.
And beneath the frozen canopy, the mound still smoked, and the small hut with the red arrow held steady, waiting for the next demand. On the 4th morning, The ice rain softened into a fine, feathery snow. The world's grip began to loosen. Eli walked the path to Matthew's hut again, but this time his step was lighter, and he carried no sled.
Matthew, I came to ask you plain. How did you know this hut would stay so warm?
Matthew said nothing. He simply reached out and tapped his knuckles against the thick turf wall.
Turf, earth and root. It holds the heat better than any split log wall ever could.
We called it a hovel, and all the while, the answer was right here, built into the walls.
Matthew, we'd be honored if you'd dine at the store tonight. The whole town wants to thank you proper.
I am obliged, Harlow, but the mound needs tending. I'll sell you more charcoal come morning.
The red arrow on his door was still there, but no one, not even Eli, saw it as a mockery anymore. Inside, Matthew read by the brazier, Cinder's head on his knee. The ice still held outside, but the truth had thawed. The sun broke through the clouds at last, and the ice began to weep from every branch in the valley. The townsfolk emerged, blinking at the wreckage, but alive. Matthew stood by his mound, watching the smoke. Eli walked into the clearing, his face earnest, and the crowd fell silent.
Matthew, I was wrong. That hut isn't a hovel. It's the warmest place in the valley. You saved us all. I am sorry for every word I said against you.
From now on, this store will carry Matthew's charcoal. It's the best fuel in the valley.
Matthew nodded once, then turned back to his mound. He added more earth to the smoldering pile, as he had done 1,000 times before. The red arrow on his door, once a mark of scorn, was now a beacon of respect. And as the sun set, Matthew sat with Cinder, a faint smile on his soot-darkened face. The truth the town had mocked was older than the valley itself. Charcoal burners had wintered in turf huts for centuries. The knowledge had been passed down through a trade everyone looked down on. Matthew always knew. The town just learned. In the spring, the very men who had painted the arrow came to help him stack the new mound. The red arrow, now framed and honored, became a mark of his trade, not a taunt. It told every traveler, here lives a collier, and his hut will keep you warm. The little turf home stood as it always had, smoke rising beside the smoking mound, beneath the arrow. A new wooden sign read, Collier's Hut, Est 1859, and from that winter forward, no one in the valley ever called it a hovel again. Matthew stood in the twilight, Cinder at his side, the glow of the mound mirroring the sunset. Spring came gently, melting the last of the ice, and Matthew began rebuilding the mound.
We owe you a winter's worth of help, Matthew. Where do you want these logs?
Stack them by the pit, slow and steady.
Harlow sent supplies to the hut without being asked. Flour, coffee, and a new pair of gloves.
I never thanked you properly for that tea. It saved my hands.
You'd have done the same.
Cinder chased the melting shadows, his tail finally wagging without the weight of winter. The red arrow stayed on the door, now a landmark for every traveler in the valley. Matthew's life was still his own, but now the town brought their axes and their respect. The valley thawed, and in the smoking mound, the next winter's salvation was already taking shape. Matthew sat on the log outside his hut, Cinder's head heavy on his knee, and looked at the red arrow on the door. He reached out and touched the faded paint, the wood rough beneath his soot-stained fingers, and felt no anger. The hut was never a hovel. It was a fortress built on centuries of knowledge. The valley would never forget what the charcoal burner taught them that winter. Inside, the brazier still glowed, and the turf walls still held the heat. The red arrow stayed, not a mockery, but a mark of respect. Beneath it, the little wooden sign read, Collier's Hut, Est 1859. And as the sun set behind the mountains, the mound still smoked, a quiet promise against the cold that would come again. The turf hut stood in the spring twilight, smoke dying, arrow barely visible, and inside, Matthew read by the brazier, cinder at his feet, his world unchanged, his worth finally known. The charcoal in his palm had outlasted every log in the valley, a truth the town would never forget. The red arrow, weathered by storm and thaw, had earned its place on that door forever. It spoke of survival, of a trade that history had long honored but the world had mocked. Matthew's hands, black with the dust of his labor, now shook without hesitation. He never gloated. He simply continued the rhythm of the mound and the fire. The hut, half swallowed by spring green, still sent its thin plume into the sky, and the red arrow remained, a silent testament to what a hovel truly was. In the end, the hovel outlasted every fire that winter, and the man who lived inside it never said, "I told you so." He just lit another piece of charcoal and waited for the next snow. The seasons turned, but the turf hut stood, its roof greening in spring, its mound smoking through every winter's bite. Travelers came to know the red arrow as a sign of certain shelter, no matter the cold outside. And in every blizzard, the valley remembered the winter the hovel outlasted every fire. Matthew grew older, his beard flecked with gray, but his hands never shook when he placed a lump on the coals. The plume of his mound became a constant on the valley's horizon, a thread of smoke that never broke. Cinder's muzzle turned white, and he no longer chased shadows, but he always found the warm spot by the brazier. And long after the red arrow faded to a scar on the wood, the story stayed alive. They spoke of the charcoal burner who refused to gloat, who simply fed the mound and waited. The arrow remained, a mark no longer of mockery, but of a trade that knew how to stay warm. And on the coldest nights, when the wind howled, the valley folk would point toward the hill and say, "Look, the collier's fire still burns." The winters came and went, each piling its drifts against the turf hut, each finding the same thin smoke still rising. Matthew no longer read by the brazier. His chair sat empty, but the coals had not cooled. Cinder kept watch for a season longer, then slept at last where the sun warmed the turf, the mound still smoking over him. The red arrow, nearly weathered away, became a thing the valley children touched for luck before the first snowfall. Generations passed, but the hut remained. It outlived the men who mocked it, and the man who built it. And always, through every winter, the mound still smoked, a tiny promise against the cold. The story became a quiet truth, told by firelight. A collier's hut is no hovel. It is a fortress built on centuries of knowing, and the charcoal that outlasted every winter. It still burned, held in a hand that never boasted, only worked. The red arrow, nearly gone, still points the way to warmth, and on the hill, the collier's fire still burns. The turf hut still stands, a low shadow on the hill, its walls holding centuries of silence. The red arrow has faded to a ghost on the wood, but those who pass this way know what it means. It points to warmth, to survival, to a trade that never needed to boast. In a world of quick flares, Matthew's charcoal burned slow and true long after the last log crumbled to ash. Inside the hut, the brazier is now cold, but the air still holds the memory of that steady heat. But outside, the mound still smokes, as it has for decades, a thread connecting the valley to its past. Spring will come again. The turf will green, and the next winter's coals are already forming in the earth. This is what the collier's hut was always meant to be, a promise made of turf and fire, kept generation after generation. It outlasted every fire, every mockery, and every storm, because some things are built, and some things simply endure. and on the hill, unheard but eternal, the collier's fire still burns,